We are very honored to have with us Professor Mohammad Marandi from the University of Tehran. Professor Marandi, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great to have you here. And I'll ask you this. I mean, some of us have seen, the images of large protests, rallies happening all across Iran in conjunction with Friday prayers today. I mean, talk about the Iranian people and where they are and how people are feeling there on the ground in the midst of these assaults.
Well, this is the major problem that the United States has. It has a lot of so-called Iran experts. It brings in Iranians or former Iranians from different uh, different agencies or different universities, and these people basically say what they want to hear. And the narrative in the United States is that the regime, as they like to call it, is collapsing, it's weak, it's hated, it's unpopular, and that all we have to do is give it a bit of a push and kill some people and bomb some places and murder some children, and it will fall apart. And the exact opposite happened, as we knew would happen, because, first of all, the Islamic Republic of Iran has always had strong popular support among its public. That does not mean that the public supports government policies or that it's happy with the economy. There there are 90 million people with 90 million different views, but overwhelmingly they believe that the Constitution is a good constitution, and they believe that the government is legitimate. So, under ordinary circumstances, these narratives that are created in Washington won't work. But when they carry out an assault on a nation and they start helping a genocidal regime that's carrying out a genocide in Gaza, when they help them attack ordinary Iranians and we see dead kids on the streets of Tehran, that is going to create a unity among ordinary Iranians that we have not seen for decades. And that, I think, was expected. But Washington, since it's always blinded to the truth and is always believing in its own fantasies, it can't see that. And even now, it can't see that. I'm sure that all these protests that you're seeing across the country today in Iran, at a time when the Israeli regime is carrying out strikes on civilian targets, they will not take that into consideration. They'll say, oh, these are just official government regime protests and that sort of nonsense. And so they'll continue to walk blind and miscalculate and lead the United States towards a very dangerous situation. Iran is not Iraq. Iran is not Libya. Iran is not Syria. Iran is not Vietnam. The damage that Iran and its allies can do to the United States could bring down the US economy. And you should look to Iraq today and this protest that we've seen in Iraq, where Muqtada Sadr on the one hand, Ayatollah Sistani on the other, and everyone in between is outraged at the United States. And what could happen in Iraq could be of major consequences to the United States if it indeed chooses to act in a directly aggressive manner against the Iranian people. And of course, the Iranian armed forces will respond very swiftly. Their capabilities in the Persian Gulf are enormous. Iran has many underground bases, and the ability for Iran to strike the Americans and those Arab family regimes in the Persian Gulf, which are very vulnerable and weak, and which export a lot of oil and gas. Iran's ability to hit them hard is visible to all, and that would lead to a crisis, an economic crisis, that I think would make 1929 and the 1930s look somewhat benign.
Mohammad Marandi, you are very well known for putting the anchors of various news programs in their place, from Sky News to Piers Morgan. And I think everybody really does appreciate those segments that you do, sometimes, narrating their own propaganda back to them. But, something much more serious happened the other day because you were doing an interview, you were filming an interview. I don't know, you can clarify exactly what happened. I saw what you were saying on Twitter. You were either in the building or next to the building that the Israelis hit of the Iranian media station that we all saw happen live on air. And then you and Piers Morgan got into a Twitter fight about it later. And I mean, he was being so disgusting towards you, as he usually is. But can you tell us what happened there?
Well, I was in the press TV building, which is a part of Iranian national radio and TV, but it's outside of the main campus or complex. And I was preparing to do the interview because they've slowed the internet. And so I have to go to government buildings or places where they have better internet. And even there, it's not, in these places, it's not very good. But I went to the Press TV building to do the interview. And at that time, while I was waiting, they struck the main building of the Iranian radio and television. And they murdered journalists and three women broadcasters, one for radio and two for television, one for a children's program. They were there. They were doing their work as they were attacked. And one of them, we saw the explosion take place behind her. And of course, in the West, it had no visibility. No, you would think that these three women would be considered as heroes in the West, women who stood steadfast under fire. But no, since they're Iranians, since they're non-white, since they're Asian, since they're Muslims, since they're linked to the Iranian television, they are worthless to Western journalists and to human rights organizations. So when this happened, and I think you're showing the footage of the strike, if I'm not mistaken, on that building. When this happened, I was told that to leave the building of Press TV, and that the building was being evacuated. And I was waiting for my to go into the to be put into connected to the studio and to begin my conversation, but I was delayed. And I told them that I have to go.
Just to clarify, this is a Piers Morgan show. Just to clarify.
Yes, Piers Morgan's team delayed me. They kept me in the backstage. I think that's what you call it. So they saw me arguing with the guard. I was pleading with him. A couple of times I raised my voice. And then ultimately the guard said, "I'm not leaving till you leave." And I felt very uncomfortable about that. So I yelled at him. And so he went downstairs. He said, "I'll go downstairs and wait for you." So I waited and waited. And then, I've also been asked to get rid of my cell phone by Iranian security people. And they said that we hear that you're on media and that may cause you trouble. So it's best for you not to get rid of your phone. I said, well, if I do that, I can't do media. And so I said, I can't. And they just left. But in any case, so I was under those circumstances. And so when I finally got to speak, Piers Morgan started insulting Iran, demonizing Iran, the sort of demonization that you hear when Western media wants to prepare the ground for murder and slaughter. You demonize, you call them evil, so that an evil regime like the Israeli regime, the genocidal regime that's carrying out this Holocaust in Gaza, could be somehow rebranded as the good guy. And so they could kill Iranians because the Iranians are evil. And that's basically what he and other people in the media were doing. So he had basically a piece of paper out in front of him, and he had this list of horrible things about Iran, which were all false. I'd once invited him to Iran, and he declined, and then he insulted me, implying that I would take him hostage or something. He's a child, but he's dishonest.
Wow.
And I think that recently, a host of journalists have visited Iran, including Max Blumenthal, George Galloway, and many others. And they spent quite a bit of time in Iran. I think Max spent and his wife Anya Parampil, they spent 2 weeks in Iran traveling the country. And they know that Iran is not at all similar to what the United States presents it as and to what Western media presents it to be. But this demonization is intentional. It is something that mainstream media is doing to prepare the grounds for more death and destruction. And that's why I consider Piers Morgan and almost all legacy media journalists to be complicit in genocide, because they have, by justifying the Israeli regime for 21 months, they have been a part of this genocide. They have been a part of this Holocaust. And what they've done in the past is unforgivable, and what they're attempting to do now is unforgivable as well.
Well, Professor, I want to ask you a question, because when you look at the context of what's happening, and certainly what, Americans are hearing, right, is that Iran is like desperately trying to develop this nuclear weapon to attack America, and there has to be some deterrence. Now, of course, there's very little evidence of that. And it just seems to me, when you look at that very little evidence, that this really isn't about nuclear weapons. It's about whether or not Iran is going to be allowed to have its own government, its own policies, stand on its own 2 feet, and become a powerful country in the region. It's obviously a very developed country, big science and technology. And it feels like that is so much of why Iran is being targeted. And we're just being told about this nuclear threat as a cover for something else, a different type of approach.
Absolutely. Not that there's little evidence. There's absolutely no evidence. And this is all about Iran's independence and Iran's support for the Palestinian people. That's it. Whether it's, I don't know, animal rights or human rights or terrorism or the nuclear program or global warming or whatever they want to throw at Iran, children's rights, whatever they want to throw at Iran, that's all the cover story. The real story is Iran's independence, Iran's sovereignty. Iran is not in the Western camp. Iran is completely supports the aspirations of the Palestinian people. Iran is opposed to ethno-supremacism and apartheid, and it calls for the full dismantling of ethno-supremacism and the notion of a chosen people or a master race or a superior people in the land of Palestine as well as anywhere else. When the revolution happened in Iran, the former regime was sending 90% of South Africa's oil. They were 90% of apartheid now South African's oil was coming from Iran. And the revolutionaries cut that off immediately. And then they cut off ties with the South African regime. And then they began funding the ANC, the military wing of the ANC, and other resistance organizations. And they did the same in Palestine. They cut off ties with the Israeli regime. They stopped investing in the Israeli armaments, and they shut their embassy and they opened a Palestinian embassy. So for the United States, that is completely unacceptable. And so regime change, or the idea of regime change in Iran, has been what the United States and its allies have been pursuing for decades. With regards to the nuclear program, as Tulsi Gabbard herself admitted just a while back, that there's no evidence that the Iranians are, the U.S. intelligence believes that Iran is not pursuing a nuclear weapon. And then Trump says, I don't care what she says. And it shows that this is all political. Even the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, he said twice in the last week that there's no evidence that Iran is pursuing a nuclear weapon, even though he is in the pocket, effectively, of the Americans. If you look back to WikiLeaks, the previous head, Amano, who's Japanese, when he wanted to become the head of the organization, he went and told the Americans, look, I will do whatever you say. I'm in your camp. Just vote for me. And that's how he got elected. In the board of governors at the IAEA, I checked on DeepSeek, 17 of the 35 are European and North American. Then there are 2, Korea, South Korea, of course, and Japan. That makes it 19. And then the chainsaw guy from Argentina, 20. That's their votes against Iran. The rest of the members of the board, which constitute the global South, they voted either against it or they didn't vote for it. And that means effectively 7 billion of 8 billion people. India didn't vote for it. China voted against it. Russia didn't voted against it. Brazil, and so on and so forth. So for those who use the argument, they know this is a false argument about the board of directors. The board of directors is a political body, but the experts that are used in the IAEA, they've never discovered any evidence that Iran has been pursuing a nuclear weapon, and Iran has not been pursuing a nuclear weapon, not today, not yesterday, and not before 2003. So this is all an excuse to help Israel because the Israeli regime has launched a war against Iran and it is failing. If it wasn't failing and if it was really doing well in accordance with the propaganda that we're seeing from the West, the United States and Trump wouldn't be moving towards aggression against Iran. They would be sitting back and enjoying themselves as the Israelis slaughter Iranians, as Western elites usually do. But now Trump is making very dangerous steps, and I say this with as a warning to all your listeners and your viewers. If the United States attacks Iran, the global economy will go downhill immediately, and the global economy will collapse. This will be far worse than the 1930s. Iran will not just, it will all these Arab family dictatorships these tiny dictatorships on this other side of the Persian Gulf. They are glass palaces, and U.S. bases exist in every single one of them. And an American attack would mean that they are complicit. And on the other hand, look at what's happening in Iraq today. Look at the people who've come to the streets in Iraq. They are completely opposed to the United States and outraged at what the United States is doing and how the United States and the Israeli regime are threatening Iranian leaders. So while the United States and the Europeans are looking more like they live in the Wild West, they don't recognize that we're not living in the 1990s anymore. This is a new era, and the United States is declining fast. The United States will not win a war against Iran, and Iran will make sure that the United States fails. Now, those American exceptionalists can continue living in their bubble thinking that they'll win. They couldn't win against Yemen. They don't have a chance against Iran. So the smart thing to do is for the United States to back off and to yank hard on Netanyahu's leash and to accept Iran's rights. I heard your previous guest speak about a consortium. Under no circumstances has Iran said, will Iran accept a consortium to replace its enrichment program? That's off the table. That's never been on the table. But Iran is willing to have a deal with the United States if the United States is sincerely worried about Iran's peaceful nuclear program. If they're sincere, which they're not, but if they're sincere and they want to solve the problem, it can be solved. This has been negotiated so many times over the years that both sides know exactly how to resolve the situation. But if Trump wants war because the Zionists and the neocons want it, then I think with the divide that we see in the United States, things will go downhill for him very fast. And I don't believe that he will finish his term in office. I think he'll be ousted.
Well, Professor Marandi, it stands to be seen. We're all waiting for what the decision of Donald Trump is, whether he wants to escalate or not. And it's hard to know because, it seems as though there's been this pattern, right, where he dispatches Steve Witkoff, whether it's with Gaza or now the same thing happened with the Iran negotiations, where everything's being negotiated, everything seems kind of to be going in a decent direction, and then it all just falls apart. It's like it was meaningless. So I'm curious, you mentioned that any sort of deal with the U.S., you kept saying if they're sincere, but you don't think they're sincere. I mean, there just seems to be a demonstrated pattern of basically tricking and lying.
Oh, yes. I mean, it's not just Trump. If you recall, under Biden, when we had the negotiations over a ceasefire in Gaza, Hamas accepted the deal, and the U.S. Secretary of State kept saying Hamas doesn't accept the deal and the Israelis do, whereas it was the exact opposite. Then when Witkoff came, they did the same thing. Witkoff was, when Hamas accepted the deal and Netanyahu didn't. They kept blaming Hamas. But ultimately, at the beginning of Trump's um, presidency, the night before when the deal was struck, what did we see happen literally a couple of weeks later? Trump himself pulled out of the deal. He destroyed the deal and said that Palestinians must leave Gaza. We see the same thing in the trade war, where one day Trump takes one position and then he says this is it, and then he backs down. We've seen this shift take place in Ukraine, where he was supposed to end the war on day one, and we thought that Kellogg was a joke, and now it seems like Kellogg is what he's saying is now official government position. So Trump has no credibility. And then on the night of the Israeli attack on Iran, he says, I'm against war. And the next day he's gloating about it. And he tells us basically that he's behind it. How can anyone negotiate with such a person? And then someone who threatens leaders, someone who tells people, like, for example, it's like me saying the people of New York must leave New York tonight. That's terrorism. But and then you don't see American elites criticizing or attacking Trump for these criminal acts. Why? Because these elites, when it comes to these issues, they're all on the same page. And when it comes to other issues, they want him removed or they despise him. But when it's killing brown people or killing people who are opposed to genocide and a Holocaust, they're all in it together. If you recall, in 2016, when Trump was elected, they called him a Russian stooge. But as soon as he started firing off missiles at poor Syria, everyone said today he's become the president. That is how corrupt Washington is. And that is the problem that not only the government has, but all of these think tanks and all of these this legacy media, this bubble that exists. They, in my opinion, they cannot be redeemed. You cannot redeem these people. And so the only way forward is for them to recognize that they cannot attack Iran and get away with it. And they will pay a very, very heavy price. And I think that when the global economy goes south, when it collapses, people in the United States will start seeking out those people who brought about this situation for the American people.
Mm-hmm. Professor Mohammad Marandi, we really, really appreciate you giving us some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.